Morning all, and welcome to episode 14 of Diary of a Security Consultant, the show where we talk all things security consultancy and in particular the Irish security industry. Probably slightly more casual looking than you used to on the show this morning. It is Tuesday morning, the 19th of May. It's probably, 6 a.m., just after 6 a.m. I got up early this morning just to get some stuff done and get this done, so slightly more casual this morning. This week's one is going to be on arrest procedure. After a couple of weeks back, we did Ace Going, and it's proved to be our most popular video so far. It's been viewed, I think, about 100 times in the first week it was out, and it kind of went with the retail security ebook that we sent out. So I said I'd follow that on. Now I changed it because of demand for something on thermal screening, so I did that, or temperature screening. And now I'm going to come back and do arrest procedure. I thought I would get the final two stages of arrest procedure done in one video, but looking at what I've put together for this one, this is probably going to be part one of a two-part arrest procedure video, possibly slightly shorter than what you would be used to seeing from us. So in this part of it, I'm going to talk about the actual preparation of the arrest, knowing what your law is, getting prepared, being aware of the risks and how you can mitigate against those risks. I've got some slides I'm going to show, but I suppose in terms of arrest and preparation and stuff like that, we're going to go over the law as it applies to arrest, and everyone should know that inside and out, what they can and can't. But secondly, especially in this day and age, I'm hoping that this video will stand the test of time and people are going to be watching this video long after coronavirus or COVID-19 is gone. But I suppose nowadays, I put an article out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think arrest should be a very, very last resort, and there should be a lot of risk assessment done. I've completed a risk assessment for a number of retailers. I'm happy to share with people if they want it. It's quite an in-depth risk assessment on retail security staff that should and should not be making arrests. And I said, look, arrest at this stage is an emergency action. It's not something that should be considered as an everyday. So I'll share the slides with you, and I'm hoping that you can see that. So like I said, this will be part one. And in this video, I'm going to go over the preparation stage of the arrest and the awareness of the law and stuff like that. But the first thing to get across is, like I was talking about there, arrest is a single toolbox, a tool in a toolbox full of options, and it should really be your last. Arrest is an emergency response when everything else hasn't worked. So all of your primary responses and your secondary responses to potential theft in your store have not worked. And now what you're left with is an arrest. And that's a mindset change for a lot of security people. Years ago, I would have written SOPs for dealing with arrest, and we would have gone into great detail with, if you see somebody, this is what you should do when you go through that Ace Going on the arrest procedure then after that. But more and more what I've been moving to over the last, I suppose, probably 8 or 9 years, is you have a dealing with theft SOP, and you have primary responses and secondary responses to potential theft in your store, and then you have emergency responses when they fail, and that's when arrest comes in as an option. Like I said, it's just one tool in a toolbox. So when I talk about primary and secondary options, I'm talking about primary being your preventative risk control. So based on your risk assessment for dealing with theft in your store, you've got your primary options up the top. Your secondary options are your management options when an incident has begun to happen. And your tertiary options then are your responses, such as arrest and things like that, you know. So to give an example, primary options when it comes to alternatives to arrest might be having a very, very high level of visual deterrence, visual presence inside your door. One of the things I always push with deterrence to theft on conflict management course and stuff like that is this principle of the universal greeting, which I always push on training with retail staff. If you have a security person, a static guard, not monitoring podium-based CCTV, but a static guard inside your shop, one of their primary functions when not patrolling should be at that entry point, and it should be greeting every single customer. Morning, sir, welcome to Murphy Supermarket. Morning, ma'am, welcome to whatever. As every person comes in, you're making direct eye contact, you're letting them know their notice that they're coming in. Good for customer service, good deterrence. Visual presence then when people are in the store, making sure your security is active, not just doing a walk around the shop, but actively targeting and spending time in your high risk areas. So let's just say you have a grocery and you walk into the alcohol section, that the security person is not just seen to walk down the alcohol section, they're seen to walk into the alcohol section, take a look on the shelves, look at your high risk products, move them aside to check for tags, make eye contact with the customers, morning, how are you, and then keep going. So that's visual presence, not just walking through. That's not visual presence. You know, when we talk about patrolling, I talk about not just doing a patrol for the sake of a patrol because you have to do an 8 o'clock patrol. It's carrying out effective security patrols, checking on the risks that are present in the risk assessments. And then obviously utilizing the security systems that you have available. If you have EAS systems, making sure that they're working, making sure that you're seen to be testing them on a regular basis. And I know the mandatory one a day that we would always say, look, we always do one a day, but I was going to say during the day, you know, security staff picking up an item, walking to a thing and testing all the items, making a note of that in the notebook and making sure that's done visually in front of people. Secondly then is your customer service approach, not being afraid to, you know, meet and greet people or utilize the store staff that you have available. If somebody suspicious comes in, one of the tools that I would always use was, you know, get a store supervisor or store sales assistant, you know, can you do me a favor? I'd just like you to walk down aisle 3 and ask the customers if they'd like any assistance. You know, walk down there, morning sir, can I help you with anything? Morning man, can I help you with anything? And then move on. You know, utilizing that tactic when somebody is already suspicious in the store. And then don't forget, one of the things I always say to people, you know, it's private property. Don't forget refusal of entry. If you have a person who's caused you issues there before, refusal of entry is always an issue. Is always an option available to you. It's a management option, but it's sometimes better to be refusing entry and dealing with that conflict at the door than it is when they're in the store. And then you've got tertiary options as well, such as recovery, arrest, and stuff like that. And we'll talk about the legal issues around recovery in a couple of minutes, you know, which is, you know, stopping the person outside the door, retrieving the goods and coming back. We'll talk about the legal precautions that have to go into place when stuff like that becomes an issue. But recovery is certainly an option in high-risk situations where safety is an issue. So we're talking about actually dealing with suspects. Like we said in the A Scone video, if anyone has seen that, if you haven't, there'll probably be a link up in one of the corners at the end to go watch it. A Scone, the detection model, falls in here where you're actually detecting a theft. From a legal point of view, that's the most important phase of any arrest, to make sure that you're right to protect yourself from civil claims. The preparation phase, which is what we're going to talk about today, is most important from a professional point of view. Well-prepared arrests usually go very, very well. Poorly prepared arrests go haywire on a regular basis. And we're going to talk about that today. And then maybe in next week's video, or in a week or two, because I've promised somebody a reasonable force video next week, we might talk about the actual arrest, how the approach happens and things. So how you actually approach the person and dealing with them after the arrest. But the preparation phase is where we are today. And like I said, what I want to talk about there is professionally prepared arrest. So having a system or a process that you go through when you observe a suspicious person. And generally, I would always say, if you're following that 8 Scone model, people have to pick up, people have to conceal stuff, or people have to approach and select stuff. But when people start concealing, you know, now you're talking about off baseline behavior or abnormal behavior. So at this point, you can start going through your preparation checklist. Do I have this? Do I have this? And this is the process that you should be going through. And one of the primary things, I suppose, within that is to know your law. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of moments. But suppose, to give you an example of something that I've seen, you know, poorly prepared arrests, and let me just put this picture in your head of an instance that I've seen over the years, where you hear a commotion behind you, walking down the street, ordinary member of the public, you're walking down the street and you hear a commotion behind you and you turn and you see somebody running. And coming running behind them is a security person and this big chase ensues. And I was like, if you think about that from the mindset of the person who is after stealing something, they're coming walking out the door and they see freedom in front. They've got away. High stress situation, runs a little bit of stress, a little bit of adrenaline is going, fight or flight is going off in their mind. They hear this shout coming from behind them. They turn and they see a security person running full speed towards them, calling them, waving with a radio in their hand, running towards them. Fight or flight is triggered in their head. Natural response, open area, run. Security guard has run out of the shop, and as he's running out, or she is calling on the radio for support as they approach the person, and that's what caused the commotion. And I've seen this happen numerous times. Person starts running, security person starts chasing them. The person who receives that call for help comes running out after them because they hear a panic call for help on the radio. Security person catches up with them, maybe grabs them using force or reasonable force, and we can talk about that in a different video. Tackles them, a bit of a scuffle ensues. The second security person or support person comes running out, hearing the commotion, sees their colleague in an argument or a fight, and they bail in on top of it. There's mobile phones out looking at this. You got two security guards wrestling with a person on the ground. Person is restrained, picked up, kicking and screaming, and it turns into something that it never ever needed to be because of just poor preparation, and mindset and culture within the security industry of this action figure approach to arrest. Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is actually mitigating those pieces of, I suppose, I won't say errors, but I suppose things that can make things look unprofessional when they don't need to be. And again, it's your brand, it's your reputation you're protecting. It's not just your company's brand that you're protecting. It's not just the client's brand that you're protecting, although they will be tarnished by that. It's your brand as an individual in society, and as your brand as an individual within the industry that will be tarnished. When this stuff goes up on YouTube or Facebook and your pictures all over the place behaving like this, and you'll see it all the comments start coming up on Facebook, and you're looking at them going, I did a great job, I arrested the shoplifter, but underneath it's going, very unprofessional, that doesn't look this, I did. All the armchair quarterbacks will be out looking at it and criticising. So it's mitigating reputational damage and professional ethos, I suppose, when you're using arrests. So power of arrest. In Ireland, and this is one, when I'm teaching this on the level 4 course, I always start off this module with the question, do security officers have the power to make an arrest in Ireland? And usually when you put that question out there, you will get a probably 50-50, 60-40 split. People who are going into the security industry, 60% say no, 40% say yes. Which is ordinary people, the guards' jobs and the rest. But in actual fact, if you talk about what the law specifically says, the Criminal Law Act 1997, Section 4, Subsection 1, you don't need to know that, but I am a nerd, says any person may arrest without warrant anyone who is or whom he or she with reasonable cause suspects to be in the act of committing an arrestable offence. Also goes on to say, where an arrestable offence has been committed, any person may arrest without warrant anyone who is or whom he or she with reasonable cause to suspect to be guilty of an offence. Very important phrases. That gives you the basis for arrest in Ireland. So it's not, there's no other thing as citizen's arrest, it is arrest. So very same section, covers the power of arrest for the guards, and it says, instead of any person, it says a member of An Garda Síochána. So exact same powers. Now, do security have the power to arrest anyone? Yes, but no more than the person working behind the reception desk in an office, the person working in McDonald's, the person working in Tesco's, the store manager. They all have the exact same power of arrest. But I suppose the reality and the nature of the role we undertake is that we sometimes work in roles that require us to apply that power a little bit more. I don't see the person in McDonald's having to use their power of arrest to arrest somebody many times over the course of their career, or the person who works behind reception in an office, or a mechanic or a plumber. Whereas we work in a role where we're probably going to be asked as an option to apply this power at some point. So it's very important that we understand what the power is. So I have a couple of important phrases kind of highlighted there. Firstly, any person. So like I said, it makes no distinction between security. You don't have any additional powers. You don't pull on your PSA license and don a cape and all of a sudden get magic powers or anything like that. It is, you have the same powers as any person, but you do have powers. Without warrant is very straightforward. You don't need a warrant for arrest, because it's what's called exigent circumstances. The crime is happening right now. And then a very important term to understand. He or she with reasonable cause to suspect is in committing. Now, I generally countenance that by saying you must witness the crime. So that says reasonable cause. Reasonable cause will protect you from criminal charges of kidnapping if you arrest somebody on somebody else's information in terms of your own. Reasonable cause does not protect you in civil court because they judge a different standard of reasonable, which we can talk about in another video. So to protect yourself in cases, in all cases, I suppose, you must witness the arrestable offence taking place. You must see it either visually, observation, person to person, or using CCTV, but you must witness the crime. You cannot act on third-party information, regardless of how much you trust that third-party information. So examples of that might be a customer comes up and says, that person over there just put something in their bag. You know, is that reasonable cause? I would not say so, because can you trust that that other person knows the ASCOM process, knows what a theft is, knows what went in the bag, has seen all the steps? No, you can't. More difficult situation, store manager comes over and says, I just saw that person put something in their bag, go arrest them. That is not reasonable cause to suspect. That is third party, it's hearsay, and it is not reasonable cause to suspect. Let me take it up a notch. Your colleague, security person, is in the cameras, radars you and says, I have a guy here, he's just bagged up a load of stuff, stand at the door, I want you to stop him. Is that reasonable cause to suspect? I would again say no. Why? That goes to court, guard asks you, you're brought into the stand, who made the arrest? I made the arrest. Stand in a stand, defense solicitor says to you, okay, can you take me through the offence that you saw my person commit from start to finish? Well, I didn't see him commit any offence. My colleague saw him commit an offence and he told me to stop him. Case is gone. And I know what happens day to day. I've been a part of it before, my younger, less experienced days. I know it does happen for circumstances where there's a big gap between the CCTV room and the point of stopping. But it is not reasonable cause to make an arrest. You must witness the offence. So it has two little caveats there. Reasonable cause to be in the act of committing an arrestable offence, and where an arrestable offence has been committed. Now that's when it comes to different types of offence, okay? So the top one there does not apply to things like theft. So that might apply to something like assault, where they're actually in assault causing harm, where they're actually in the act of committing the arrestable offence. They're doing it and you have the power to make that arrest, you know? But I suppose theft, the transfer of control of the property, which we talked about in the ASCOM video, doesn't actually happen until they leave the property. So this one applies. The offence has been committed when you make the arrest, if you know what I mean. So oftentimes you have to wait for the offence to actually commit before you commit to making the arrest. But there are circumstances such as serious assault, or it might be sexual crimes where they're in the act of committing it and you can make that arrest. But today we're just talking about, I suppose, retail stuff. Now, one thing I want to talk about there, I'm going to talk about this term of arrestable offence in a minute, but one thing to say, the line after that, or sorry, two sections under that, it says that where a person has been arrested by a member other than a guard, they must be transferred to the custody of An Garda Síochána as soon as is reasonably practical. Now, that throws up an issue for us. Basically, what that says is that every person who is arrested should be transferred to the guard. So the guard should be called for every single arrest. You know, otherwise it's not a true arrest. But we all know that doesn't happen in reality. And I think the likelihood of somebody claiming a false arrest because I was arrested and then I wasn't transferred to guard is pretty small, because at any point you could still call the guards. So, you know, it's just longer than is reasonably practical. But I would say there are circumstances where health and safety, and sometimes a person's rights and dignities will come above processing the arrest. And health and safety, your safety, you know, it does. So if I go outside the door to stop somebody and they become aggressive or violent, or potentially aggressive or violent, or become aware of other risk factors in the environment that lead it to be no longer safe to proceed with the arrest. I've got the goods back, but it's no longer safe to continue holding this person. That's absolutely fine. Like, they become violent, they become aggressive, they become aware of a weapon or other people who are with them, or bystanders are beginning to get angry, you know, then that's a very good and legitimate reason not to continue with the arrest process, to continue holding that person. And like I said in another video, if you have enough evidence to walk out there and step in front of the person, you had enough evidence to call the guards. You know, so don't be forced or pressured into making those arrests. Another one that sometimes comes up is rights and dignities. You've arrested a person, you've detained them, you're 2.5 hours into waiting for the guards, and you ring the guards and they say, look, we're going to be at least another 40 minutes. You know, this person hasn't eaten, haven't been able to go to the bathroom, they've got kids to collect, stuff like that. I would say there has to be a question that's raised, and again, it would have to be taken on an individual case basis. You're risk assessing the evidence that you have and ability to hand over to the guards, that evidence later. You know, do you have details for the person? Do you have CCTV, stuff like that? Have you recovered your goods? Against the dignity of the person and your own dignity to be standing in that room. The shop might be closing, you might have, you know, people to collect, you might have a bus to catch and stuff like that. So your own rights and dignities and stuff like that have to be respected as well. But that would be on a case-by-case basis. And in my opinion, not a legal expert, but in my opinion of these cases, would be respected later on in court, I think, you know. So that term arrestable offence is important to understand. Not every crime is an arrestable offence. We've got different sorts of crimes, and I'm not going to go into the definition of the categories of crimes now. We've got summary offences, we've got indictable offences, we've got arrestable offences. And arrestable offences is actually defined in the Criminal Law Act 1997. So if we go back to that previous slide, it said that we can only arrest a person for an arrestable offence. So it's important to understand what is an arrestable offence. I'm going to read this out. An arrestable offence is an offence for which a person of full capacity and not previously convicted may, under or by virtue of any enactment, be punished by imprisonment for a term of 5 years or by a more severe penalty. So, sounds complicated. Basically what it says is arrests can only be made for arrestable offences, and arrestable offences are crimes for which a person can receive more than 5 years in prison. Now, important to look at a couple of things there. Guy walks into a local Euro giant shop, let's just say, steals a packet of Mars bars for €2. There is no way in all logical world that he is getting more than 5 years in prison if he's convicted. So convicted is the important word. However, what crime has he committed? He has committed the crime of theft. And the enactment, as you see here, the enactment that covers the crime of theft is the Criminal Justice Theft and Fraud Offences Act. And if I look at that crime of theft as it's written in the law, the maximum sentence for the crime of theft in Ireland is 10 years. And this is why it's important to know your laws. So basically what this section says is that any crime that the maximum term written down in the law is 5 years or more is arrestable. So that's why you need to know your legislation, know your sections, and know your punishments. You know, it's very, very important that you know what they are. Now, the property crimes are generally straightforward. Criminal Justice Theft and Fraud Offences Act. So if you're talking about theft, 10 years. Obtaining goods by deception, 5 years. Robbery, life. Burglary, 14 years. You know, so they're all really pretty straightforward ones, you know. But what the point I'm trying to get at, it's not for you to decide whether they will or will not get more than 5 years. That's for a court to decide. Your job is to know the crime and know whether it's arrestable or not. So theft is an arrestable offence by virtue of the fact that the maximum term for theft is 10 years or more. Another important one to recognise is this one up the top here, of full capacity. So that may apply to things like children who are under the age of criminal responsibility. Is it an arrestable offence? You know, again, you don't know the age till after you've arrested them, so I would proceed, and then probably the charges won't proceed. It doesn't make it a bad arrest. People with special needs or additional needs could come into it as well. Is it an arrestable offence if a person who is obviously not of full capacity? They're talking about mental capacity here. You know, so it's something to bear in mind. So that's what an arrestable offence is, and that's the law and around it. So you must witness it. You must know what the offence is, and you must know that it's arrestable when it comes to it. So we're going to get on to the preparation stage. And I would say at that, when you go through the ASCO and you've seen the person approach, you've seen them select, every customer who wants to buy something in your store has to approach and select goods in your store. But once that concealment happens, now we're going through this checklist. Firstly, do I have support? So at that point, I would be going, okay, where is my nearest support? People say, well, I'm the only security person here. You still need support. Arrest is not a lone working activity. If you are working in a venue where you are only the security person, your SOP should not contain arrest unless there is a person who is adequately trained to support you, such as a store manager, and not just by virtue of the fact that they are the store manager or there's a manager in the shop, that they are adequately trained. Otherwise, I cannot see any way that a security company's risk assessment can ask you to safely make an arrest. Arrest, in my opinion, and I've done a lot of cases on this, I've gone to court a number of times on this, and I've said it a number of times, arrest is not a lone working activity. And the risks are too high and they are just not manageable. Nobody is saying that you cannot, you're not physically capable of making an arrest on your own. the risks associated with it are too high to carry out as a lone working task. You just take a horrible situation. You walk out the door after somebody, €20 bottle of whiskey, they walk out the door, you're on your own, you're the only security person. You walk out the door, guy produces, he walks on a little side street, produces a knife and stabs you. You're on the ground bleeding down this side road. Especially if you're a store detective. Bystanders find you, call an ambulance, off you go. Nobody in your shop knows where you've gone, when you've gone, where you are, that you've been stabbed, that you're on the way to a hospital. None of the bystanders know who you are, they just call you an ambulance. You know? So the support is vitally important. As soon as we see concealment, that's our time for getting on our radio or phone. Look, I have a person here in the process of concealment. I need you to get to the exit point. Now, I'm not asking that person, my support person, to get to the exit point to make the stop. I'm asking them to get there so that my witness is present, my support role is present when I get there. So I'm not waiting on my support person to make the arrest. So they are there, get to the exit point, wait outside the door for me. You know, and again, this is in those circumstances where nothing else has worked. Sometimes I might say to my support person, can you go down the aisle there and ask that person if they want a little bit of help with something? We try to put them off, but that hasn't worked. They still go, okay, get to the exit door, stay outside the door, wait for my call. Walk outside the door and stop them. At this point, I'm also going through my equipment checklist. I'm thinking, what am I going to need to process this arrest? Well, I'm certainly going to need my radio to keep in contact with my support, two-way radio. I'm certainly going to need a notebook and pen. I will probably want to have some level of PPE with me, certainly gloves at least, and in the modern, I suppose, in the environment that we're operating in, potentially a mask if we're going down this route, sanitizer maybe. I want to have a method of communication that's not my two-way radio, so I need to have a phone. It's very hard to call the guards on a two-way radio, excuse me. And I need to be aware, I need to have a safe location where I can bring the person back. If I don't have a safe location, I shouldn't be bringing them back in the store. You shouldn't be bringing a person back into a location that increases risk for you. So if I've only got a manager's office that has scissors and computers and phone cables and it's not safe to bring a person back into, then I shouldn't be increasing risk by bringing the person back inside the store. We'll talk about that again. All of this comes back to a risk-based approach to arrest. So they're the things I'm kind of going through in my own head as I, you know, as soon as I see that concealment, I have observation, I need you to get to the door on the radio, and I'll do my pocket check. You know, I always do my standard pocket check, notebook, pen, gloves, radio, phone, done, back check. And I suppose keys, if you need keys for an office or whatever the case might be, making sure I have my phone with me. And I've been that guy before, I'm watching them on the cameras and I get so preoccupied. And as soon as the person's out the door, I go. And then when I make the arrest and get to the holding room or the office, I realize that I don't have my notebook or pen or whatever the case might be, you know. So make sure I risk assess a safe location to bring them back to. And I suppose understanding the risks. Physical attack is a real and ever-present risk. We need to understand what we're walking out into, you know, and we don't know what we don't know. There are a lot of unknowns when you follow a person outside the door. Physical attack is probably the real and ever-present one that sits in people's heads quite a lot. What if the person becomes physically assaultive? Can I escape? And we'll talk about that in the next episode, or in the later episode, part 2 of this episode, when we talk about how we distance ourselves and stuff like that. But physical attack is really never present, and you have to accept that risk is there. If you go out there thinking you're not going to be attacked at some point, you're sorely wrong. Unknown weapons, again, we don't know. We only see the person as they present inside the shop, except we don't know what they're carrying. I was doing an interview this week on thermal screening and stuff, and you're asking about the effectiveness of thermal screening, and I was saying to them, assume everybody is affected. And I say the same thing with weapons. It doesn't matter whether it's a 72-year-old woman you're going outside the door after, a young child, or a person who looks like they have addiction issues. Assume everybody is armed, you know, and take the required control measures. You know, set up your workspace and stuff like that to control it. And we can talk about that in a different video. Unknown offenders, both in terms of you don't know what that person's motivation is, you don't know what their skill set is, and you don't know anything about other offenders who may be outside the store as you walk out. But always plan for those worst case scenarios. So we might be talking about, okay, motivation. They might need this to pay off a debt. They might be in real trouble. It might be addiction related. that's very high motivations. If that fight or flight decision is going off in your head, that they are very high motivations that would lead to that being triggered in people. Whereas a person who just sees something and likes it, if they see you going, dump it and go, you know. Unknown numbers of offenders. That is the advantage of having your support person outside the door. But you have an overall view of what's happening outside the door and maybe give you a heads up. But you don't know what you don't know as you go outside the door. And you also don't know about skill set. You know, what is this person's pre-existing skill set? Are they a violent person? Do they have any sort of training or skills that you don't know about? Do they have any kind of mental health or illnesses that you don't know about? You know, you don't know what you don't know. Legal risks. We're walking out after them. You got the obvious false arrest. Shouldn't even be entering your head at this point. All you're concentrating on is going, you know, following those processes. If you're sure enough to stop them, you're sure it's a good arrest. Shouldn't be entering your head. If you're going, I was only 99%, you shouldn't be standing out in front of that person. You know, you need to be 100% sure before you step outside your area of responsibility that this is a good arrest. But you still have legal risks. How you speak to the person. You got to worry about defamation. You got to worry about reasonable force. You got to worry about duty of care. Once you stop that person, once you step in front of that person, restrain their liberty, you arrest them. Yeah, you've got to be concerned with a duty of care now to that person. You know, so you now have a duty of care to that person. Things that might happen within it if they get hurt or injured while they're in your custody. And then the other one you have to consider, especially in today's day and age, hygiene and body fluid risk. So we're now talking about things like coughing, body fluids, even breathing within 1 meter or 2 meters. Incredibly hard to make an arrest at 2 meters different distance, you know. And again, that comes back to your risk assessment. Should you be even making these arrests? But you're also going to have people who have just hygiene and body fluid risks. You're going to have people who are going through periods of homelessness and through no fault of their own have no access to hygiene products or washing products and may not be the most hygienic in the world. You're also going to have people with transmissible diseases, you know, hepatitis, other illnesses like that, you know, that come into contact, that may come into contact through body fluid or cuts, and you want to protect yourself from those. And again, assume everybody is affected, you know, when you're going out there. So when you're taking your risk-based approach, assume everybody's going to hurt you, assume everybody's carrying a weapon, assume everybody has support, and assume everybody has an illness or disease, and take those control measures. So the control measures, then we talk about your witness role, and like I said, that's the advantage of your witness role outside of the store, being that they can see the ground, the territory that you can't see where you're seeing inside the store. They should be in contact with you, either a phone or radio, and they're able to say, look, street is clear, no obvious help or support, and be positioning themselves in a place to support yourself. Use of available CCTV, knowing where your outside cameras are, if you have outside cameras, and attempting to position yourself in such a way that you can utilize those cameras to reduce the likelihood of claims or attacks, that you saying that you said and did things that you did or didn't. And then having a knowledge of the law and your policy. So law and policy are two different things. When it comes to reasonable force making an arrest, the law says that a person may use reasonable force to effect a lawful arrest. The law allows you to use reasonable force to make a lawful arrest. That does not mean that your employer's or your store's policy want you to make reasonable force, want you to use reasonable force to make a lawful arrest. And that can be a dichotomy. The guards might arrive and go, absolutely, you use reasonable force, you stop them, you're well within your right to do it, and you still get sacked. And there's nothing you can do about that. Why? Because you breached your store's policy. Even though the law says you can do it, you weren't acting as our employee, you're acting as our employee, we told you not to do it, and you breached our policy. We're going to investigate you, we're going to discipline you, we're going to sack you. Why? Because they don't want to accept the liability of you using reasonable force. And if they let you away with it today, somebody else uses it tomorrow, and somebody gets hurt, then there's a liability for them. So they have to go, reasonable force, we do or don't allow it, and that should be spelled out in the policy. If it's not, ask. If you're not sure whether your employer, or if it's not in the policy, you ask, and you ask for it to be put into the policy or the risk assessment. Read your risk assessment, read your arrest procedure policy, and know what it is. An understanding of proxemics, what we call the angle of approach, how we manage distance and space as we're approaching people. So again, it comes back to knowing your environment. We'll talk about this in the third video about the approach and how we approach it, and then knowing what your PPE is. and having that PPE present. If you're looking at somebody inside the door and all the visual indicators give off things like hygiene risk, addiction issues, stuff like that. So you've got visual indicators that lead you with your experience to believe that this person is a hygiene risk or has addiction issues, then I will be applying my PPE before I go out. So while I'm still watching the person, I'm putting on my gloves at the desk. You know, I have my mask in my hand as I walk out the door, or whatever the case might be, so that when I get out, I'm not going, oh Jesus, I need to get the gloves out and put them on to make the arrest. I'm prepared when I step in front of that person. They can see that, you know, and it adds to that deterrence approach. So that's the end of the preparation phase. Like I said, preparation is important because we want to have well-prepared arrests. Well-prepared arrests support us with making the arrest go smoother. You know, it reduces risk of things going wrong, all those little variables that we talked about today, the physical attack and the weapons. So the more we can reduce that likelihood, but most importantly, to reduce the likelihood of false arrests, is knowing your law in preparation. Know what an arrestable offence is, any offence that gets you more than 5 years in prison. Knowing that you must witness the crime taking place. Knowing that you have to wait till after the crime of theft takes place. Knowing what equipment you need, what support levels to have, and what you have available, and then using your experiential judgment based on your own level of skills and judgment to make assumptions and make risk-based judgments on what's happening outside the door. So, like I said, hopefully next week we are going to get to do one on the second part of this, which is the actual arrest itself, and then I have a reasonable force one, which is upcoming as well. This week, for the duration of the week, on Friday, I'm giving a talk for the Safety and Security Risk Executive in Dublin online, which is on carrying out risk assessments. I'm not sure if we'll share that publicly or not, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about it about conducting security risk assessments. And next Saturday night, for anyone who's interested, for nightclub security services in the US, they're putting on a 2-hour webinar on conflict management and de-escalation skills. And I'm a guest speaker on that, talking about my approach to de-escalation and conflict management in nightclub environments. So I can share the link to that as well if anybody's interested, for Zachary Ruin's podcast. Until next week, thank you very much. You can always get in touch, just like you saw on the screen there. Facebook, The Security Operative. LinkedIn, Security Operative Consultancy Services. Same on Instagram. You can get us on email, info@securityoperative.ie, or through the contact page on the website. And until next week, thank you very much for listening, and stay safe out there.